Hi class, hope you're doing all right during this what I consider to be a crazy time with the pandemic and our political situation and the wildfires and the election coming up. All these different things are happening. But anyway, today we're going to be looking at chapter 1, which is basically communication theory. And that's in both classes, 1315 and 1321. This lecture is for you because in chapter 1, the chapter 1 in both courses goes over the communication theory. And also I wanted to say again, you all, I'm so sorry the live session didn't work out. It was so frustrating. We're going to try again next week because you may have questions about the assignment for the TED Talk summaries, and then you may have questions over this lecture in chapter 1 and all of that fun stuff. And I really want to meet you. So for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, we tried to have our live session through Blackboard Collaborate, and I couldn't hear you all, and you all couldn't hear me. We could see each other, but we couldn't hear. And I don't know. Today, same computer, same time. I helped my husband, do his, and of course it worked like a charm. And the little microphone on mine was working great today. So it must have been something with Blackboard Collaborate. I don't know what was going on. But anyway, we're going to try again. We will not give up. So let's talk a little bit about communication theory and chapter 1. And I did give you, well, the light's real bad. But anyway, this handout, you have this handout under handouts. And it's a communication theory lecture study guide. So if you want to go ahead and click on handouts and then download it and print it out, and then you can follow along with the lecture, that would be great. So, and I'm actually going to start this whole lecture on the second page, because these are our questions that are going to guide us. So what we want to know is, what is communication? Okay, let's face it, probably all of us have some sort of operational definition of communication. But from a theorist point of view, what really is communication? And we'll say, oh, they had a problem with communication. Oh, there was a communication breakdown. Oh, they got a divorce because they had bad communication. So that's one of the things we want to look at, that this chapter examines. But really, the problem, class, is not communication. It's miscommunication. That's quite literally when a communication has missed, when there's a misunderstanding. So that's the other thing. That's really, why do so many miscommunications occur? And then, of course, the logical question from that is, how do we minimize miscommunication? And hopefully now when we look at the theory, that's going to help us. And if you look in chapter 1, speech 1315 students, you'll find in chapter 1 there's a diagram of the communication process. And my 1321 students who are in the business communication class, same thing. If you look in chapter 1, you're going to see that there's a diagram of that communication process. And the one that we really accept today is called the transactional model of communication. So that's really what we're going to focus on today and break this thing down, because that diagram that describes this process is really going to answer that question. What is communication? It will also answer the other ones. Why do so many miscommunications occur? And then how do we minimize it? Okay, but there's something else I want you to think about, and that is, every time we miscommunicate, we may not be aware of it or not, but there's a cost. When we have a misunderstanding, when we have a miscommunication, it costs us something. Sometimes it's time, sometimes it's money, sometimes it's a relationship, maybe it's cost you a grade when you've had a miscommunication with a teacher. So there's always a cost. And I'm going to give you some business examples. And I want you to think of some personal examples. Think of a time when a miscommunication in your life cost you something. And they can be funny, because some of them are, right? They can be funny, or it could be more serious. So just take a minute right now to think of a time in your life when a miscommunication cost you something. And you could either jot it down or just think about it. Think of text messages especially, because those, a lot of times, we get into misunderstandings. And we're going to find out why during the lecture. So those are kind of our guiding questions. So here's an example though. So this is an older one. Some of these ones I use are older. And these come from Communicating for Results, which is our 1321 textbook by Cheryl Hamilton. These are actually examples from her earlier edition, and I just think they're better. They're funnier. So how many of you out there like Dr. Pepper? Anybody? You like the soda, Dr. Pepper? And I don't know. You answer that question. I'm starting to like the flavored sparkling waters myself. But anyway, so my Dr. Pepper people, you're going to like this. So this was back in the 1970s, so long time ago. And there was this very popular commercial for Dr. Pepper because back in those days, if you were an aspiring musician, you could actually feed yourself while you were trying to hit it big by writing what were called jingles. These were original scores, and you could sell them to advertisers and they would run them with their commercials. That's what they did. Today, I don't see as many of those. It seems like we just sort of recycle old rock songs or old pop songs, and then I guess the companies pay royalties, to whoever wrote the song. But anyway, we had jingles. So there was a real popular one, and it went something like this. And I'm sorry, I feel the need to demonstrate it, but I may not stand up. So here it goes. I'm a pepper, you're a pepper, wouldn't you like to be a pepper too, Dr. Pepper? Drink Dr. Pepper. Okay, so it was this real cute little jingle. If you want to, you can go to YouTube and you could type in Dr. Pepper commercial 1970s. If I get a chance, I'll upload it for you and you'll see. So why do I bring this up? We were all singing it on the playground because, yes, I was little when this came out. We would sing it on the playground. And guess what? This advertising campaign with Dr. Pepper was really successful. I think it's the Coca-Cola company that has Dr. Pepper. They made tons of money off this advertising campaign with the I'm a pepper, you're a pepper, wouldn't you want to be a pepper too? Well, guess what? The advertisers turned around and they used this same jingle, this same commercial in Great Britain, okay, in England. And of course, they already knew about the soda, right? They were drinking Dr. Peppers too. But guess what? This advertising campaign in England was a total failure. It just did not work. It did not boost sales, nothing. And they couldn't figure out why. Well, when they analyzed what went wrong, here's what went wrong. Pepper, the word pepper, is British slang for prostitute. Okay, at least it was back then. So pepper meant prostitute. It was slang. It was British slang. So can you imagine? Here's what the Brits are hearing when they're watching this commercial. I'm a hoe, you're a hoe, wouldn't you like to be a hoe too? Okay, so they were all laughing at us, right? It was like, those Yanks, they've done it again, because that's what they call us over there, is Yanks. But anyway, so kind of a funny example, but that is what happened and why it failed. So what are some other examples? This is an older example also, and you may have heard this one, but back in the same time period, 70s and 80s, there was a car that was called the Chevy Nova, okay, made by GM. So the Chevy Nova, right? Very popular car. If you want to do a Google search, type in Chevy Nova. You can look at the pictures. And if you're a car buff, you may know what I'm talking about. So very popular car, right? And why? Well, the name has something to do with it. In English, nova means what? Exploding star. It's this awesome thing. The car's gonna whoosh along like an exploding star. I don't really think it did, but anyway, so it had a positive connotation. Well, GM turned around and tried to market the Chevy Nova in Mexico. Okay, but again, just like in England, in Mexico, the whole thing was a failure. They couldn't sell these Chevy Novas. Well, again, GM, and it cost them millions of dollars. All right, we're talking millions of dollars. That was the cost, right? So GM analyzes again what went wrong, and there was a language problem. So in English, nova is an exploding star. In Spanish, it's the Chevy Nova. The Chevy No-Go. And who the heck wants to buy a car that's not going to go? So another kind of funny older example, but these are again examples that show you these are really stupid things, and yet the cost was millions of dollars because there were communication problems. This is the whole point. And then sometimes it costs people their lives. And I noticed on Netflix, I think it's on Netflix, there's a movie about Challenger, the Challenger space shuttle. And I don't know if anybody's watched it yet. Maybe you've heard about it in your history classes. But the space shuttle Challenger happened in 1986. And before 9/11, it was one of those events that if you were alive and cognizant at the time, you knew where you were when Challenger exploded, okay, because that's what happened. Seconds after that rocket launched carrying the space shuttle, it exploded, okay, minutes after the launch. And of course, the space shuttle missions had been quite successful before. So successful that Challenger had a new twist. It was a big PR movement, or a big kind of public relations deal, not only by the government, but by NASA, to send a civilian into space with the astronauts on the space shuttle, because that was the whole sort of ideal of the space shuttle missions, is that eventually it was going to be able to transport civilians to and from the space station. So they decided the first civilian they wanted to put into space would be a teacher. And sure enough, the teacher that won, they submitted essays and applications and this and that, was a science teacher named Krista McAuliffe. So she was chosen to be the first teacher in space. And there would be newscasts and little programs, clips of her training with the astronauts for this mission. Well, in 1986, I was a senior in college. I was a senior at Trinity University in San Antonio. And I was working as an intern in the public relations department because I was an English major. My bachelor's is in English, and I have a minor in theater, and then I went on for a master's in communication and a master's in theater. Anyway, so I was an intern, and Trinity still does have this. I was an intern for Trinity's public relations department. I don't know if I said that. Anyway, Trinity still does have this amazing speaker series. They're sitting on a large endowment, and they would pull in all kinds of just fabulous speakers. Well, guess what? Trinity had already booked Krista McAuliffe to come and speak at Trinity when she got down from the mission, when she got down from the space shuttle mission. Well, lo and behold, I was put in charge of the publicity packet, okay? So I had to write a lot of press releases. I had to do a lot of research, wrote articles, researched her heavily, did all that great stuff. After you research someone, you kind of feel like you know them. Her students loved her. She was married. She had kids. Ironically enough, the morning that Space Shuttle Challenger launched in 1986, I walked into my boss's office in the Trinity's PR department and put that press packet on her desk. And she looked up at me and she just shook her head and she said, "You haven't watched the news today, have you, this morning?" And I said, "No, I haven't." And she's like, "Go out in the foyer, the TVs are there." And sure enough, I went out in the foyer and there it was over and over, kind of like we saw with the footage of 9/11 with the planes crashing into the buildings over and over. There it was, Space Shuttle Challenger lifting off and exploding. Of course, killing Krista McAuliffe and the other astronauts in front of her parents, her family, who were at Cape Canaveral watching the launch live, and of course, her students that were watching it. So very, very traumatic event. And this was, I think, really the beginning of the downslide for NASA. And you're sitting there, okay, Ms. McNeil, why are you rolling on this? Because, and I don't know, I haven't watched the movie, so I'm anxious to see this new movie. But according to an earlier edition of Cheryl Hamilton's Communicating for Results, there were some communication things going on. First of all, there was a problem with the O-ring. Okay, that's what caused the failure. That's what caused the rocket to blow up. Okay, the O-ring. And upper management, is way up here, and you've got the engineers that are on the floor, and in different organizations, you have all these different departments. It's not so much that management was way above them in terms of rank, it was just distance, right? And so the engineers have a particular way of talking and checklisting things, and it's different from management's, right? So according to her, in one of the reports, the engineers had listed the O-ring factor as quote unquote closed. They meant there was a problem with the O-ring, but upper management looked at that and read that and thought it meant they were good to go. So because of one word, we end up with this tragedy. But I think it's more complex than that. In later analysis, and like I said, I'm anxious to see the movie, that message actually got clarified, I believe. But there was lots of things, there was lots of pressure. The launch had been delayed because of weather. There was a lot of sort of PR pressure to get the mission off and make everything look good. So what maybe caused management to not hear, to not see, to not understand that this was a real risk factor? Or did they understand it and decide to override it? So there's another example where miscommunication, and we're going to talk about noise, all the pressure, all the interference, all the mixed messages that the pressure management felt to go ahead with the launch may have contributed to them not understanding how serious that O-ring factor was. So I throw that out there because that's a pretty big cost. Okay, you're costing lives. And think for a minute, what are some more contemporary examples? Can you think of them? You have your personal example. Can you think of a contemporary example? Another communication, a miscommunication that's cost something. So think of those. You can kind of look in the news, just to kind of get your brains going. But so that's why this is important, right? It's not just to learn it for the course, but it's to understand there's costs. So let's take a stab then, and we'll go back to the first page of your handout. Let's take a stab at the first question, what is communication, and start kind of breaking this down. And some of this, it's a lot of vocabulary. So what are the different forms of communication? And these are also known as communication codes, okay? Because here's the first opportunity for miscommunication. We don't realize this, but language is a code. Nonverbal symbols that we use, is a code. Our tone of voice, our paralanguage is a code. All of these symbolize what we are trying to communicate. Okay? It's known as symbolic interaction. Particularly language, we are using word symbols to represent things in reality that we are talking about, and also ideas. Okay? So those are the codes. We've got the verbal code. The verbal code is anything to do with words. Now we tend to use verbal and oral synonymously, and that's true, that's correct. But the technical definition of verbal, and notice verb, right, is anything to do with words. So this includes written language also. So that's one code, the language or verbal code. Then we've got the vocal code. Vocal is what we also call paralanguage, and that's your tone of voice, your volume, your pitch, how fast you're talking, okay? Your vocal quality, the rhythm, your vocal tone is also a code. And that changes the meaning of the message. That communicates particular things. And then we have the nonverbal communication code, also known as the visual code, and this is your body language. So your facial expressions, eye contact, your movements, your gestures, your posture, what you're wearing, okay, your dress, how you're dressed that day, your appearance, all of that fun stuff. So let's kind of, I think you can grasp the verbal code. Let's talk a little bit about the vocal code. How does the vocal code communicate? Oh, and by the way, I think there's a little pie chart still in the Communicating for Results book that argues, and the Speech 1315 also, that argues that the majority of the meaning of the content of a message is actually conveyed through our body language and our paralanguage. Only about a third of the meaning of that message depends on the words we use. Now, class, how can that be? And by the way, there's another vocabulary term, the message. And the message is the central thing. It's our key term in our communication field, is the message. And what is that? It's the content of the communication. And what is the definition of communication? Shared meaning. When we are sharing relatively the same meaning, then we say the communication has succeeded. We're communicating when we are sharing meaning, because that's what we're after. What does the sender mean? Or what does person A mean? What does the receiver who sends back the response to person A, and maybe I'm the receiver and I'm person B, what does that message mean? So let's take a look at this. So, and I usually demonstrate this in class. This is such a pain that we're not face-to-face. But anyway, so let's take the word nothing, okay, in the English language, nothing, okay? So let's say that I'm walking in, you can imagine I'm walking in, and my partner over here asks me, so what did you do last night? Okay, so I'm going to answer this question 3 times, but I'm going to change the meaning. It's going to be the same word, nothing. So what did you do last night? Nothing. Okay, that's the first meaning. So what did you do last night? Nothing. And the third time, so what did you do last night? Nothing. Okay, so you get my drift, class, right? You heard it, did you not? You saw it. So the same word, nothing, but 3 different meanings. Now you could see my body language, right? But even if we had been on the phone, you would have known what I meant from my paralanguage, from the tone. First, nothing. Nothing. Second, nothing. Nothing. Third, nothing. Nothing. See, you would have heard it even if you mute me, mute the screen so you can't see me. You could have listened to that paralanguage and known what it meant. So what did the first nothing mean? Nothing. Really didn't do anything last night. Second nothing? Nothing. I'm pissed. Maybe I'm upset because I didn't do anything last night and you were supposed to call me. And then the third nothing? Something happened, right, class? Maybe a bit naughty, okay? But you get my drift here. It is the same word symbol, but we got three different meanings because of the codes. We didn't have we had the language code. The language code didn't change, but the paralanguage and the body language did, and it altered the meaning. Okay, so that's how the majority of the content of a message is conveyed with body language and vocally. I'll give you another example. So say I came here and I'm talking to you all and I tell you, you know what, class? You did a great job with that first set of speeches. I'm just here to tell you to keep up the good work. Okay, so what message did you receive? My words said that your speeches were great. But I bet that's not the message you received. I bet you thought, oh, I guess they really sucked. She's being so sarcastic, I guess. Geez. So what told you that? When the messages conflict, when the language code and the body language and the paralanguage code conflict, guess which one people pay more attention to? The words or the body language and the paralanguage? The body language and the paralanguage. So that overrode the verbal code. Okay, so that's something else to keep in mind. So when there's a mixed message, people are gonna when your body, your voice, and your words don't match, people are going to pay more attention to your body and your words. And so anyway, so that's that. So those are the three codes. And let's see, let me see what else. So those are the three main codes that we talk about. Okay, the verbal, the vocal, and the nonverbal. But there's some other interesting codes. In my 1321 class, you have a whole chapter devoted to nonverbal communication. So we'll talk a little bit more about these in your class. 1315, it's more of a survey, but I still like to throw these out. So one of the other codes, one of them is proxemics. And proxemics has to do with the way we negotiate space. So what does it say? What message do I convey when I get into someone else's space? When I get too close to them? Okay, a person may feel very uncomfortable, like what the heck are you doing? So if you want proxemics in action, think about when you get into a crowded elevator. It's very crowded. What do people do? They kind of shrink up. We look at the numbers. We hope the elevator goes very fast. Okay, so this is sort of our nonverbal behavior because we're close to each other and we're actually violating our personal space. And in the West, this is not culturally universal. In the West, we have a pretty big bubble of what's considered to be personal space. So it's uncomfortable, right? So proxemics, how do we communicate with space? This can also be with furniture arrangement or objects or the way we place things. In stores, proxemics we communicate how we want people to walk around. We communicate what sort of products that we want them to see first. In a job interview, sometimes it's better if you don't have a physical desk or obstacle between you and the person that you're interviewing, because there's a there's literally something between you. There's an obstacle. So sometimes people will open up the space when they interview to make it more comfortable. So proxemics. And we're not in a classroom, but if we were, think about where you usually sit when you're in a classroom. Do you like to sit in the back, the middle, the front? And even though in college,